fishing grounds in Northeast Atlantic and Northwest Atlantic region, fishing grounds in the Northeast Pacific and in the Northwest Pacific regions, the fish trade and reasons for little development of commercial marine fishing in the tropics. The vast continental shelf of the Northwest Atlantic provides an excellent breeding ground for fish. They feed on the plankton, which is abundant here because of the cool water and shallow seas. Besides the famous Grand Banks southeast of Newfoundland, there are other lesser banks including Green Bank, Sable Bank, St. Pierre Bank and George Bank. Fish comes in enormous shoals to spawn in shallow seas of the Canadian American coast and are caught all around the year. Of Newfoundland, at about latitude of 45° to 55° north is the zone of convergence of the cold Labrador Current and the warm Gulf Stream. While the icebergs that come south of the Labrador Current bring minerals from land on which plankton thrive. They also constitute a navigational hazard. At one time, fishing was also hampered by poor visibility because of the dense fog formed over the water surface where warm and cold currents converge. Ships and dories often ran into one another or were wrecked on icebergs under such weather conditions, and many were lost. However, vessels are equipped with radar which can see through the fogs also. Wireless services keep them in constant contact with their headquarters on land. Lack of natural resources on land has driven the people to the sea. There are few minerals, agricultural land is restricted and growing season is very short. When the early settlers first sailed across the Atlantic and made their home in Canada and the United States of America, they had no difficulty in finding shipbuilding materials. There were large stretches of virgin temperature forest which provided timber for the construction of sailing vessels and the fishing craft. The New England states were noted for their shipbuilding industries. Ports such as Boston, Portland and St. John's or Halifax in Canada are still important for shipbuilding. The timber also provides material for barrels and boxes for the packing and preservation of fish. The cool temperate climate not only favorable large-scale commercial fishing but also the preservation and storage of fish, which is very important. Modern canning and refrigerating facilities accelerate the fish export trade. The seas adjoining the western shores of North America from Alaska to California form another prosperous fishing region. Along its highly irregular and indented coastline of about 11,200 kilometers and in some of the Pacific, bound rivers such as the Keena and Fraser are many fish concentrated rivers. Salmon is the most valuable fish caught. It is mostly exported as canned salmon. Since salmon come back to the freshwater rivers to the spawn, they are easily caught by purse, seines, pound nets or gill nets. Salmon have been caught for the past 100 years in such number that stocks have been greatly depleted. With the construction of dam and the pollution of river water, even those salmon which escape being caught may be either killed or prevented from reaching their spawning ground. There are now few salmon left in most of the American and Canadian rivers, and the bulk of haul comes from the newer source in Alaska. Most salmon canned in Alaska are shipped to Vancouver and Seattle for export. Attempts have been made to prevent further depletion of the salmon by artificial fertilization of salmon eggs in hatcheries and their subsequent redistribution to the overfished rivers. By clearing streams and by providing ladders or wires to assist salmon in their run upstream for spawning, and by legislation against excessive salmon fishing. But only time will show whether these are successful methodology or unsuccessful. In recent years, huge catches of Alaska pollock, pelagic fish used for both food and meal have been the main catch due to reduced stock of the traditionally caught species. Further south, in the warmer waters of California, tuna and sardine fishing assumes greater prominence. Large quantities of crabs, shrimps, and oysters are also caught for the North American market. Catches in the Northeast Pacific by USA and Canada are far smaller than by Japan and USSR. Now you may be thinking, what is the status of fishing ground in United States? The United States of America takes 5th place in the annual fish output of the world with an annual catch of around 3 million tons, mainly from the Atlantic and Pacific seaboards. The fishing grounds extend from Alaska to California on the Pacific side and from Maine to Florida on the Atlantic side. The leading fishing states are Alaska, California, Delaware, and New Jersey, etc. The shallow waters of the Atlantic seaboards yield menhaden, mackerel, herring, cod, ocean perch, flounder, whiting, and many other species. The major landing ports are New Bedford, New Haven, Baltimore, Beaufort, and Jacksonville. On Pacific side, Alaska pollock and salmon are the leading species, followed by tuna, sardine, and plicard of the California coast. Another important fish is known as shellfish. Shellfish are an important part of the American fishing industry. Shrimps, crabs, prawns, lobster, and oysters are the most important one. The shrimps and prawns fisheries are based on the ports bordering the Gulf of Mexico. Lobsters are caught into the coastal waters of New England, while crabs are found in the Chesapeake Bay and off the Gulf states. The oyster fishery of Chesapeake Bay and Long Island Sound is probably the greatest in the world. The sponges harvested in the shallow tropical waters in the reef in Key West of the coast of Florida support a thriving sponge industry. Byproducts of the shellfish include the manufacture of poultry grit, lime, and pearl buttons. Many Americans take to fishing as a sport, especially in inland lake and rivers. Fishing in Canada. The annual output of Canadian fisheries is a little larger than that of Britain. Canadian fisheries were increasingly threatened by overseas trawlers during the early 1970s, and stocks were seriously overfished. Canada and the USA were both among the first countries to claim the 320 kilometers special economic zones in 1976 to 77 to protect their fisheries. The chief fish were salmon, cod, lobsters, herring, haddock, halibut, flounder, sole, sardine, and whitefish. Canada's small population cannot absorb the entire catch, and much of the fish is exported wet to the United States and dry to Latin America and southwestern Europe. Canadian fish comes from two major areas. Newfoundland with Labrador remains the leading fishing ground. Cod is the traditional catch on the banks, while the lobsters of Nova Scotia have attained greater prominence in recent years. The revolution of fishing methods during the 20th century using trawls, nets, and powered boats has increased catches tremendously. At the same time, widening the fishing areas to the deeper parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Salmon is caught in very large quantities in the maritime provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. In eastern Canada, fishing and its related industries provide a valuable source of employment and export earning, especially in Newfoundland, where there are 40 freezing plants and nearly 60 salt fish plants. The inland freshwater fisheries of Canada produces salmon, trout, and whitefish, which are caught chief rivers and the lakes, for example in the Greater Lake or in the Great Salve Lake. The Northwest Pacific from Bering Sea to the East China Sea is the world's greatest fishing region. Computed in total tonnage of fish caught, the annual yield is well over 17 million tons, of which Japan alone accounts for about 8.5 million. The rest is shared by China, South and North Korea, and Eastern USSR. Within the enclosed sea example, the Sea of Okhotsk, Sea of Japan, Yellow Sea and the East China Sea are found intensive form of inshore as well as deep sea fishing. There are probably more people engaged in fishing here than in any other part of the world. Commercial fishing is the best developed in Japan, where the industry is very highly organized and the fishing methods are modern in nature. Compared to Japan, the Chinese under the communist regime have laid greater emphasis on the importance of marine harvest. But China still specializes in inshore fishing and inland fish culture. With an estimated population of around 865 million, the demand for fish, which forms an essential part of the Chinese diet, is continually growing. Fishermen from the overcrowded provinces of Guangdong, Fujian, Zhejiang and Jiangsu have had a tradition of seafaring for many centuries. They sail in junks and tongkangs into the East Chinese Seas and bring home a rich variety of fish, shellfish and other marine food. In the inland rivers and the lakes, fishermen uses all sorts of nets, traps and lines, including the use of fishing birds, that is also known as cormorants, to catch the fish. The next important region in this connection is USSR. The USSR is continuously expanding its sea fisheries. On the Pacific border, the Japanese fishing fleets have been excluded from the Sea of Okhotsk since 1946, and in 1956, Convention for High Sea Fisheries on the Northwest Pacific Ocean was concluded with Japan to restrict the freedom of open fishing. The drive for increased fish output has now made the USSR the second greatest fishing nation with an annual production of 9 million tons. In other words, I can say that 13% of the world output. This can be compared with the catch of 2.3 million tons in 1960 and 7 million tons in 1970. The USSR fishing fleets are not confined to the Pacific, however. They make huge catches in the Arctic of northern Norway and northern USSR, in Northeast Atlantic region of eastern North America, in the Antarctica and even in the tropical water of Indian Ocean. The bulk of the catch in Northwest Pacific is made up of salmon from the Kurils, Sakhalin and Kamchatka. Other fish caught include Alaska, pollock, tuna. The USSR is the leading whaling nation. Large quantities of freshwater fish including eels, carp, trout and salmon are also caught in the Siberian rivers and the Caspian Sea. The expansion of Russian fishing industries has often been to the determinant of longer established fishing nations, especially Norway. The fishing industries in Japan. Japan, whose annual catch amounts to 14.5% of the world output, has a long established fishing industries. In Japan, there are many villages which are known as the fishing villages. Fishing villages, large and small, are found all along the rugged coastline from Hokkaido to Kyushu. Fishermen on western Honshu exploit the shallow waters of the Sea of Japan as far west, and the Chinese and the Korean waters. Inshore fishing is very well developed in the coastal waters of Japan. Fishermen do not sail more than a few kilometers out to the sea in their small fishing craft. They fish either as a full-time occupation or only seasonally to supplement their farm income. So, they have developed their own indigenous methods to develop the fishing grounds. Deep sea fishing for cod, Alaska, pollock, herring, tuna and mackerel has developed more recently. Large modern vessels fish the Pacific Oceans and operate in every oceans. The fishing fleets are owned by a large corporation and are complete with refrigeration plants, floating canneries and processing facilities. Many restrictions have been imposed on Japanese fleet. To the north, vessels are not permitted to fish and the Soviet-controlled Sea of Okhotsk. To the west, the Ri line drawn up by South Korean government keeps the Japanese fishermen away from the Korean water. Japanese fishing fleets, and this is in part of a penalty to be paid for the excessive efficiency, since Japanese depredations have reduced fish stocks and forced other countries to protect their fisheries in the interest of conservation and their own fishing fleets. In whaling, Japan is the second largest whaling nation. The Japanese hunt whales in the nearby North Pacific as well as in the Antarctica region is well known. Paddling in 𝗂𝗶𝗇 Sea and the artificial pearl culture at Ise Bay forms yet another aspect of the Japanese fishing industries. There are more than 10,000 Japanese employed in this unique industry. Fishermen also practice seaweed collection and seaweed farming. The edible seaweeds are largely consumed by Japanese and the Chinese, while the industrial seaweeds are converted into iodine, gelatin and fertilizers. The fish wastes and inferior fishes are turned into fish meals for animals. Fodders are ground into fish manures and are used extensively in Japanese farm. Fish and other marine products play a vital part in the Japanese economy. Fishing fleets and methods are highly developed, and Japan has become a center for fish research. The development and importance of Japanese fishing industries are the result of many combined factors. Fish and fisheries are economically and socially important. At the same time, they result in significant social and environmental impacts that must be managed effectively if we are to meet the ambitious goals of the SDGs, which is also known as Sustainable Development Goals. Fisheries worldwide currently catch about 130 million tons of fish a year, both reported and unreported, which in 2015 generates about $180 billion annually. Using the average global multiplier, a measure of the economic impact of $1 of landed value of fish sold at the dock, marine fisheries create economic impacts of an estimated $500 billion a year. Of the total amount of fish supplied, about 40% was marketed live fresh or chilled, while 46% was processed in frozen, cured or other prepared forms for human consumption, with the remaining 14% allocated to non-food uses. Fisheries are particularly important in developing countries where they support numerous small-scale artisanal and subsistence fisheries who often provide crucial food supply, sustain regional economies and support the social and cultural values of the areas. So, these sectors are crucial to the livelihood of people living in many coastal communities around the world. The share of the total fish production that is exported increased significantly from 25% in mid-1970s to nearly 40% in 2011. reflecting the sector's growing degree of integration in the global economy. In recent years, localization policies, technological innovations, improvement in processing, packaging and transportation, as well as changes in the distribution and marketing have further accelerated this trend, while facilitating the emergence of complex supply chain in which goods often cross national boundaries several times before final consumption. Developing countries account for more than 50% of all fisheries exports in value terms. The PRC, Thailand, Vietnam, India and Indonesia are among the leading players in this connection. Overall, net exports of fish and fish products from developing countries largely exceed those of agricultural commodities such as rice, meat, sugar or coffee. In terms of export markets, developed countries have traditionally represented a major outlet, with roughly 2/3 of developing countries' exports directed to them. A growing share of these exports consist of processed fisheries products prepared from imports of raw fish that are processed and re-exported. The re-export phenomena reflects the growth of global value chains and the fact that low-cost processing means fish may be caught in one part of the world. We see that in countries such as Maldives, Cape Verde or Mozambique, fisheries represent up to 50% of the total merchandise export, with a share going up to 60% or even 75% in certain years. This very high level of reliance on fisheries resources suggests these countries may be particularly vulnerable should be the health of the fish stock decline as a result of overfishing, or should the fish stock move as a result of climate change, severely undermine the SDGs of poverty reduction, which is also known as SDG 1, and hunger reduction, or in other words I can say SDG goal 2, while sustaining marine ecosystem into distant future, that is also known as SDG 14. So, the leading fish importing countries in value terms are the United States, Japan and Spain. On the other hand, the PRC and Japan are the top importers in terms of quantity and value respectively. The European Union, the United States and Japan are highly dependent on imports for their consumption. The European Union is the largest single market in the world with about 26% of the world import. In recent years, however, a number of emerging markets have grown in importance, including the PRC, Brazil, Mexico and Russian Federation, and the region of Asia and Near East in general. While developed countries were responsible for 86% of the total imports in 1990, it was only 76% in 2010. The first important factor is climate. Warm ocean waters are less favorable for plankton growth. Warm and humid climate increases the cost of refrigerations. The second important factor is economies of scale. Fish occurs in a small and scattered group, which makes fishing relatively expensive. The third important is the market. Fish are not the primary dietary choices, as the tropics have abundant agricultural resources and cheaper proteinaceous foods like poultry. Another important factor is export potential. Tropical fish have higher oil content compared to the proteinaceous temperate fish. Another factor is capital. The poor tropical countries do not stand a chance against their affluent temperate counterpart in capital-intensive commercial fishing industries. Most of the tropics have a straight coastline, unlike the temperate regions where most of the coast is indented and deep. Hence, commercial fishing ports are hard to develop in the tropics. The first and foremost is the topography. The continents in the southern hemisphere have very narrow continental shelves. Except for the region around the Falkland Island, When it comes to the anthropogenic factor, market plays an important role. Cattle rearing in pampas of South America and Eastern Australia, dairying in New Zealand, and agriculture in South Africa means that Southern Hemisphere has more affordable alternative to fishes. After discussing the above theme, we can say that a fishery is the enterprise of raising or harvesting fish and other aquatic life. Fisheries and aquaculture constitute an important economic activity with a vast potential for sustainably exploiting a wide variety of inland and marine fisheries resources around the world and specifically in India. It is important to understand that about 500 million people worldwide are economically dependent on fisheries. And that is the reason it is very important to understand different factors as well as distribution, development and different limitations of fishing industries in economic geography.